I'm all set. So, Jerry, while you do that, I will introduce you.
Okay.
So, Jerry Appell is the early college coordinator at River Valley Community College, which is part of the community college system of New Hampshire. Prior to that, he was a concurrent enrollment instructor at I can't say this,
Well, it's
Monadnock Regional High School in Swansea, New Hampshire, and he is a longtime NEACEP member and New Hampshire member at large. He will present Class Divided, the effect of student pay models on participation by first generation low income students in concurrent enrollment programs. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you, Carissa, and thanks for having me do this coffee talk today. A couple of disclaimers, and first a question. Can everybody see the PowerPoint? Victory. Okay, as someone who's regularly a Zoom user, I was a little concerned about that. Google is like my least used platform, so I'm glad I'm getting a little better at it. And yeah, I want to just start by, and as much as I'm happy to be here today, my original plan was to do this in April. So I did, you know, like when I do research, and I guess a lot of you might be like this, you start kind of wide and then you get narrower and more precise as you go along in the process. So there's a lot of extraneous things that are kind of floating around in my head about this research I'm doing. So I'm trying to, I'll try to curtail that as much as possible and give you sort of a disciplined kind of presentation today. And if you're wondering about the title and the sort of reference to Jane Elliott, who did a social experiment in her elementary school classroom back in the 1960s, that's intentional. And I'll just really quickly summarize that in case you're not familiar or it's been a long time since you heard of it. Jane Elliott was a elementary school teacher in Iowa. And shortly after the assassination of Martin Luther King, she was concerned about the fact that her class in rural Iowa was entirely, I think, comprised of, and they were third graders, comprised of white students. We're not really understanding, you know, the full impact of being a person who was sort of the other, considered the other, or was on the receiving end of prejudice and racism. And she made it a sort of a wide lens experiment so that some of her students would feel the effects of not being part of a privileged group. And so what she did was she divided them into brown eyes, blue eyes, and the way my mind works, I'm always thinking, well, what about people with hazel eyes? She actually did that in sort of a contrived manner. I think she just assigned people as brown eyes, blue eyes. And so one day the brown-eyed students got the privilege and the blue-eyed students were sort of identified as troublemakers and slow learners. And then the next day, I think she reversed it so that all students got to experience the same thing. And how that impacts my understanding of concurrent enrollment, as both a former teacher and also now a promoter of the program, I find that there is sort of a parallel. I don't want to say an exact parallel where that's certainly not the intention of any of us in this program. But what happens, at least in my experience in concurrent enrollment courses, and I want to make sure everybody can, I hope that the text here isn't blocked by anything, but this is sort of my abstract. Most of this will be bulleted, and I'll have a visual for this as well, but I'll just read this one part. So it's sort of an abstract for a paper I'm writing. I'm also trying to do presentations on this in general. Our programs, concurrent enrollment programs, and again, I'm not sure if there are people on the call here who aren't familiar with our terminology. So these are courses that are taught in a high school, a public high school in many cases, by a high school teacher who's appointed as an adjunct at a cooperating partner in college. And we commonly promote them as cost-effective pathways to higher education. Equity engines is a term that I've only recently come across. I kind of like it, for first generation low income. And that acronym I think comes out of Yale University. I don't know who invented it, but what happens is that even states that are classified as tuition free by reports like it's not building for equity, funding for equity, I'm sorry. I looked up New Hampshire. And so New Hampshire is listed as a state pay. And I know we had a presentation a couple months ago on this topic, how you have three streams, basically. It's the school district, the student, or the state, or some kind of combination of the three. And that got me thinking, because I did look that up in Funding for Equity and some other resources that are out there on this topic. And New Hampshire is actually listed as state pay. But the reality is it's only partially state pay. So in the state of New Hampshire, as some of you may know on this call, students receive 2 free courses per academic year, in whether it's dual enrollment on campus or whether it's concurrent enrollment in the classroom. Beyond that, there's a tuition charge. It could be anywhere from $150 if it's a high school-based program or course, or it could be more than that. It could be over $400 if it's on campus. But again, my focus here today is to talk about the high school classroom, because that is a different entity, if you will, than individual transactions. And I'm going to move to a visual that kind of goes over that. But I did want to sort of finish kind of summarizing this abstract. Employing a student pay model is frequently associated with family income rather than academic readiness. What ends up happening in some high school classrooms is sometimes the strongest students, I even saw it one time with the valedictorian, was not able to access the college credit in time before the registration period ended, but had the highest grade in the class. And it was a class based on a college syllabus. And these are students that become, in this person's situation, an unregistered participant. They're attending, completing credit-bearing college courses offered at their high school, but are unable to attain a college transcript due to financial considerations. So I created, being a former high school teacher, and I know some of you may also, I know some of you on this call have done that work as well as concurrent enrollment instructors. I sort of wanted to give this a visual view about what actually happens. And so what I did was I created a classroom of 12 students. Half of them are registered for the college credit, half are unregistered. And then I put their final grades in just to sort of give you a range of what happens. And I call this an unregistered phenomenon, that students that do the college work but did not receive the credit. And the Jane Elliott parallel, again, it mimics the brown-eyed, blue-eyed experiment to some degree. And it really depends a lot on whatever pressures are borne upon the students to make the choice to register. So I'll give you a glimpse into this. And I've experienced it in a variety of different levels, and I've been a participant in some of the very things I'm critiquing. So some of us, and I have been among this group, we go into the classroom at the beginning of the year, this classroom we're looking at right now, if we can imagine, and we sell this program and this opportunity as an equity-based program to everybody in the room. Having had a sales background, I sometimes, have to question myself as coming across like somebody who's selling a home equity loan. I am so sorry about that phone. Should have shut it off. That please act now. Don't wait. You only have until October 30th, and you're going to regret it if you don't, because you might want it later. Better to need it, not have it, and all those phrases we use when we're trying to give a sense of urgency to a customer, if you will. And not only that, all right, the instructor also becomes part of that process, because they are now an adjunct with our college, and they have a vested interest in making sure that they get full participation and for good motivations. I don't want this to, I'm half apologize here for using the analogy to an equity or home equity salesperson. Hoping that didn't offend people, but I've seen that occur, that a student is reluctant and then they get the talk. They get the conversation about, well, you may not be going to college, but you can use it in the military and so on and so forth. And so we do that. And then what also occurs, and some of this is anecdotal and I hope some of this will be research-based when I'm done, is that some students who might be experiencing some kind of income insecurity are not necessarily going to be telling their teacher and definitely not their peers. And what occurs is that, we have a timeline for this. So let's say this class starts in September, they have until the end of October to make that registration. And maybe they even start it because somebody like me, and I've done it, we go in there and stand over them. So not only do we, sell the program, we also try to make sure before we leave the room that everybody is signed up. And again, the motives are benign, always. It is a great opportunity. But we don't always know what the hidden stories are for some of the students that don't register. And I'm not to say that all of them are for financial reasons. Some might just be for motivational reasons. But what ends up occurring is that some of the students that may be struggling with income, and again, I'm not a psychologist, but there is some anecdotal data that suggests this, that these students internalize the stress that their parents are feeling. So if they hear their parents having intense discussions at the kitchen table about how they're going to pay the bills because one or both of them are unemployed, the last thing they want to do is to confront them with a $150 tuition charge because they've exceeded their funding under the state scholarship. So all of that has an impact on this ecosystem. And again, I'm not scripting myself here, so I hope I remember what I want to say, is that there's a difference between, let's say, that student in the upper right-hand side of this chart, right, who's unregistered. There's a difference between that student inside this classroom and that same student registering for a campus course. If they're registering for a campus course, that's an individual transaction. That's a transactional relationship between that student and the community college that they're going to. But when it's in a classroom, this is a collective transaction in a sense, and everybody in the room is affected by the outcome of their peers in one way or another. And if I'm a teacher, in fact, when I did teach this type of a class, one of the things that I bragged about to people when I was trying to sell them an idea of concurrent enrollment, and I'm talking about my peers and people outside the high school, was that it was a motivational tool that actually, I would say, well, Johnny Jones, I had him last year. He didn't really care about his education, but as soon as he registered for this course, boy, was he ever motivated. And once that happens, that's an interactive process between the teacher and that student. I start viewing the students as motivated versus unmotivated to some degree. Maybe I don't know anything about their home life and what might be hindering them to do that registration. So that's sort of where I wanted to go with that in terms of, just to give you a sort of an illustration of what a teacher might be seeing, what might be affecting a classroom, and what the effect of having that type of fractured registration might be on that community. Because a classroom in a high school, and those of you that have taught high school or are teaching high school know that a classroom is a community in and of itself. And to just go back to Jane Elliott again, she understood that. It's a microcosm of society, to not to be, to overstate the case. So in the process of doing research, and I do want to be mindful of the time, it's 9:14, so I don't have too many more slides, but I want to give you a sense of the kind of questions I'm asking in the research, some maybe of the challenges and maybe the applications of the research. And then I really want to take questions, suggestions. Again, this is a work in progress, so I welcome any kind of direction that people might provide. Some of the questions I'm asking: what is the impact of student pay models on participation in first generation, I'll just use the acronym FGLI students, in concurrent enrollment courses? Can we see data that shows that when we make a shift to, and I've seen it anecdotally with my own schools, that when schools that have 100% funding, regardless of the number of concurrent enrollment courses taken, there is greater participation. But that's also true in student pay models in school districts that are dominated by upper income families. Are registration payment deadlines discriminatory towards FGLI students in high school concurrent enrollment courses? One of the things that comes up a lot for me, and it probably comes up for some of you, is a year and a half after the course is over, I get a phone call from a parent who might say, I didn't know there was a charge, my son, daughter didn't tell me, can they register now? And it's so funny to me because everybody in the college community, that's blasphemous. That's, that is a, what do we call it? Retroactive registration. It is sort of a cardinal sin in dual enrollment. But I have never met anybody outside of college that makes sense to. I mean, as far as these parents are concerned, they took the class. It was based on our curriculum. They got an A. They didn't sign something, so it's not a class. And I was joking about this. I hesitate to say this in a recording, but I was joking a little bit with my colleague Shauna last week about when I was in fifth grade. I was in an altar boy class, and I didn't actually stay with that. I won't go into my dropout experience with it. It was not the last time I dropped out of a class, but one of the things that came up is transubstantiation, and this is sort of that. And again, I'm a practicing Catholic, so no offense or anything, but when the wine turns into blood and the bread turns into the body of Christ, we kind of get metaphysical with these courses. So we start saying, well, when the registrar is arguing with the student who took the course, well, you didn't really take the course. Oh yeah, you were there, but it wasn't a course yet because you didn't sign your name and you didn't pay the bill, right? And it becomes, to us, that makes total sense, right? That's like, yeah, of course. But to the public, makes absolutely no sense at all. And so I do think someday we may want to reconcile that. It's 917, keeping an eye on that. What is this educational and psychological impact on a classroom community where there's unequal access to concurrent enrollment opportunities? Does this affect people who are first-gen students who this may be their first opportunity to take a class, right? Is there an effect on their willingness to continue on a pathway as a result of this type of experience? And again, I'm backtracking a little bit. I don't have hard data yet on how often this happens, by the way, but it's happened enough anecdotally in my lived experience as a teacher and as a college representative that I think it's noteworthy. In many cases, in many school districts, this never occurs, right? And, and also people that go through this and they don't register for a course and maybe they regret not registering, the psychological impact may be minimal after that course is over. But within the context of that living organism called a classroom, in the actual present moment, it can. Right? The teacher unconsciously may be, doing this type of anointing, sorry for the religious analogies, all right, of students that actually have registered for the course. So there's a lot of gray area in that I'm exploring. And does available data indicate if a transition to tuition-free models increases enrollment and also is financially sustainable for the college itself that sponsors it? What am I doing in the methods and how am I going about this? It's early in the going, all right? So right now I'm reviewing existing literature related to concurrent enrollment costs, looking at, the Funding for Equity report and looking at the different accreditation organizations, Higher Learning Commission, NEACEP, and so forth, see what they have to say about it. I am doing two things that will require RRB review and institutional review board review. I'm doing that through my college. One is a stakeholder survey. In this one, I'm limiting it to instructors, counselors, administrators, possibly former students. I'm not sure. I definitely was not intending to do current students. I just think there's too much internal conflict with that. And with all of this, there's informed consent, and I'm following all the procedures for that. I also want to have some of those individuals that answer a survey, and the questions are going to be basically what I've been talking about, questions about what the experience is of students in your classroom or in your charge that are not participating in this experience. Hopefully do interviews with a number of stakeholders anonymously. And then determining the scope of the study, how much relevance does it have for people outside New Hampshire, where most of my population is, New Hampshire and Vermont, and data collection. Finally, and then I'll take questions. We'll have close to 10 minutes. Some research applications. Maybe, and this would be the takeaways for anybody that reads this report that I'm writing or attends a presentation that I might be doing in a conference or wherever. The correlation between student pay models and FGLI participation in concurrent enrollment programs. Also to articulate, enables us all to articulate better the microeconomic, psychological impacts of this on of student pay models on this population. There is a microeconomic, and by microeconomic, I'm just simply meaning within that classroom, those of us who have privilege and those of us that don't, both have motivations not to share that with people around us. I even, I'm always hesitant to let people know, what kind of encouragement my own parents gave me for college. I don't want to, when I'm in a group of people where that might have some impact. I think teachers and students need to have a greater voice in this process, and in general in concurrent enrollment courses, what their experience is. And I know we've done this to some extent, but this particular experience, I've actually had students who call me asking about getting college credit retroactively, and which is really what the basis of this, my motivation for doing the research was in the first place. And it's interesting what they, what their experience was in terms of how they felt in their classroom, but also what their reasons were for not registering in the first place. And then finally, I'm hoping that takeaway would be all of us being able to contribute to ongoing conversations about equity-based tuition alternatives to a student pay model wherever it might exist. And that is my overview. I do have one data chart I threw up. I almost forgot I put this slide up. The one that's interesting to me, mostly for my research, is the one in the upper right with parents with at least a bachelor's degree and the opportunities to take courses. It varies from 42% to 26% for students with parents of high school diploma or less. And these are the reasons for that I know have been discussed in a variety of different formats and probably at many of our conferences, but it will be, that kind of data will be noteworthy as I go further along in this research. So I want to thank you guys for having me do this, and I'll take any questions, comments, or ideas that anyone has to offer.
So Jerry, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I know that you're looking specifically at this particular issue, but it kind of sounds very similar to me to students who have maybe other things that complicate their access apart from this. And I'm thinking from a neurodivergent lens. And I'm wondering if you've got any research or data that you've looked at around that psychological aspect that you mentioned.
Oh, I haven't collected anything like that yet. I'm in the early going, Carrie, but and those two things can be, co-causal in a way as well. That is a really fascinating variant on this, because I think that does occur in a lot of these classrooms. And some students are not necessarily diagnosed by their school, so their teacher's not even aware of that. And